Let's start, and let me introduce to one of our wonderful partners, licensed tour guide, Miss Lori Williams. A little bit about her. She's originally from New Jersey, moved to Washington, D.C. in the mid-'80s to attend the Howard University. She fell in love with the area and has been ever since. She is a certified meeting planner and also works full-time as a director of operations for the American College of Cardiology, where she plans their annual convention of approximately 20,000 people. She also had a passion to become a tour guide. So now she is one of our wonderful licensed storytellers in Washington, D.C. Now we will have her to tell us the story of African American Heritage Tour. We can also develop different type of topics. This is a wonderful platform to do it virtually. You can be in any part of the world with your family. We can tell you the story of a certain place that you want to see. And now, Miss Lori, I'm going to take my camera off and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Straw, for that wonderful introduction. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am licensed tour guide Lori Williamson, and I am delighted to bring you today's African American Heritage Tour. And as Ms. Straw said, this is one of the specialty tours. If you want to have a happy hour with your family, work groups, social groups, fraternity, sorority, give us a call, because whatever your interest in Washington, we've got you covered. So I'd like to begin looking at this beautiful, colorful mural where you see noted comedian Dave Chappelle, former mayor of Washington, D.C., Marion Barry, and broadcaster Jim Vance. Now we're going to look at another part to this mural a little later in the tour, but for right now, let's dive in and start the tour. So the White House, we're in Washington, D.C., of course, and there's the Capitol, and we're in about May of 1940, busy as ever with people and cars and traffic. But I'd like to take you to a 9-block stretch of U Street in Northwest D.C. that was very popular between about the 1920s to the 1960s. It was the entertainment hub of Washington called Black Broadway. Now I'm going to invite you to do a little time travel with me, and let's listen to the radio.
It is finally here, and time to get your life. This is DC's favorite, oh, so fine disc jockey, Thundercat. Now, I know you had a hard week working for the man, so it's time to relax, kick your feet up, and unwind. So come out and meet me later on Black Broadway on U Street. Tonight, the delightful and beautiful Miss Pearl Bailey will be performing at the Lincoln Theater, 8 o'clock sharp.
Let me tell you, it was something else. The roaring 20s indeed. When jazz and bebop hit Washington, D.C., it was like a freight train rolling through this little southern town. People just couldn't get enough of it.
Shows at the Howard Theater, bands at the Caverns and Republic Gardens, just to name a few. And you had to visit the Lincoln Theater and the Lincoln Ballroom, where everyone was dressed in their finest. U Street was the place to see and be seen. Even our 32nd president, FDR, found a little bit of time to spend on U Street. Everyone came to unwind and enjoy. You saw the legends of entertainment: Dizzy Gillespie, Cab Calloway, Pearl Bailey, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan singing in her soulful voice, the Dunbar Theater, James Brown, and anyone who was anybody performed at the Dunbar Theater. And as I said, everyone was welcome. And you're looking at the legends in entertainment. And just a local note, Duke Ellington grew up on 13th Street, just a few blocks from U Street. So he's definitely a part of the local history. And as we fast forward to today, U Street, as well as a lot of DC, is experiencing a resurgence. And you see these beautiful murals all over the city. This is another part to the one we looked at earlier. Father of Go-Go, Chuck Brown. Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is standing underneath her representation of the mural, wrapped proudly in the red and white flag of DC. She's been fighting for statehood, I think, ever since she's been in politics. This mural happens to be on the side of Ben's Chili Bowl, iconic DC restaurant that's been around since, I believe, 1958. The first person on our far left is activist and comedian Dick Gregory in the red suit. And here we have former President and First Lady Barack and Michelle Obama, icon Prince, and up above, draped in green with her lantern leading the way to freedom, is Harriet Tubman. The community actually decided who was going to be on this mural. And just as Eleanor Holmes Norton is fighting for freedom, a lot of protests have kicked off in Washington, D.C., many at a place you may or may not know called Meridian Hill Park, also known as Malcolm X Park, because of the activism that started there. So join me at Meridian Hill and let's take a look at some of the protests. African liberation. It could have been divesting from Africa. The school system, better schools for all, housing, equality, fairness, ending bias, whatever it was, DC provides a national stage. And many protests are loud, but change comes in many voices. Meet the beautiful Marian Anderson, who was just internationally known, world famous by the time she was 42. Howard University invited her to sing as part of a concert series in 1939, and they needed a venue. DAR Constitution Hall would have been the perfect place, the perfect size, but the Daughters of the American Revolution denied her because of her race. Well, that didn't stop her. Organizers held it on federal land, the site of the Lincoln Memorial, and look at this crowd. Marian Anderson sang to 75,000 people who had come to see her. This was the largest crowd she had ever performed in front of, and she performed for about 25 minutes. Also, just a note about Marian Anderson, she did receive later in life a Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest honor that can be given to a civilian. And she was in good company with many others in receiving that. Another behind the scenes voice that you may or may not know, A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph was actually one of the chief architects of the 1963 March on Washington. And some of you know that the extended name is For Jobs and Freedom. He represented jobs. Martin Luther King represented freedom. Now, there is a statue of A. Philip Randolph that you've probably walked past a few times. It's in Union Station in Washington, D.C. How many of you recognize it? Well, it's there because in 1925, A. Philip Randolph founded the International Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which was the largest African-American and most successful trade union at that time. And he dedicated his life to keeping the rights of Black workers on the front of any racial agenda. And there you see a picture of the famous Pullman car porters, or some of them who worked on the trains. And here we have, of course, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who with A. Philip Randolph brought 250,000 people to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 for his historic speech and a day of peaceful protest. And I'd like to mention that there are people from every race, color, creed, and age in this crowd. Can you imagine 250,000 people peacefully protesting? Let's do another little time travel and listen to a bit of Dr. King's speech.
happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners, will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood? I have a dream. My four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the soul with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a soul of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. We will be able to speed up that day with all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty.
Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. Those are the words of Martin Luther King. And this tribute to him stands at 1964 Independence Avenue in commemoration of passing of the landmark 1964 Civil Rights Act that outlawed discrimination based on sex, origin, religion, color, race. President Obama dedicated this statue in 2011, and people from all over the world have come to see it. It includes a 450-foot crescent-shaped wall that includes 14 quotes from Dr. King. Sadly, just 5 years after that historic speech in 1968, the world was forever changed when Dr. King was assassinated at the young age of 39. And as you can see, as we get closer to the statue, his legs are unfinished. His body is not finished. His work is not finished. And it's up to all of us to continue that dream. Words from his speech that we just heard said that his faith made him believe that out of the mountain of despair, we could hew a stone of hope. One of the quotes at the memorial that I like to share with my groups is this one that states that the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Martin Luther King would have been so proud that on November 4, 2008, Barack Hussein Obama was sworn in as the 44th president of the United States. He and his wife, Michelle, served and inspired us for 2 terms. And here's a picture of him with Sasha and Malia. Community service was very important to him during his term. And here's a lighter moment in a White House elevator, but how many of you know that handsome gentleman on the left? Well, let me introduce you to Wilson Roosevelt German, who served through 11 terms, about 50 years of service. He worked as a butler in the White House, and he died at the age of 91 on May 16, 2020, from the coronavirus. Michelle Obama said that his kindness and care made the White House a home. And just as we had so many who served behind the scenes at the White House, the same is true of the Capitol building. Now, you may be familiar or have noticed in passing that statue on top of the Capitol dome. It's called Freedom. And it's a classical female figure with long hair and a helmet with a crest composed of an eagle's head and feathers. But I'd like to tell you a story that you may not know about this structure. This was designed by Thomas Crawford in his studio in Italy in 1856. It's a massive structure. It's 19 and a half feet and weighs 15,000 pounds. So the idea was for him to cast it in plaster, cut it in pieces, ship it to the US where it would be recast in bronze before it was set atop the Capitol dome. So this work was going along fine. And then the foreman working on the project decided to stop because he figured he was the only one who could do this work. He demanded more money. But he was surprised when the owner of the foundry, Clark Mills, said, you know what, forget it, we don't need you. And what Clark Mills did was turn the project over to an enslaved man who had been working alongside the foreman, and that man's name was Philip Reed. Philip Reed had the knowledge to put the statue back together and saw it raised to the Capitol dome in 1863. And as just a bit of poetic justice, a year earlier, before it was raised, Philip Reed got his freedom by virtue of the DC Emancipation Act of 1862. And then just 4 years after freedom was raised, Howard University was chartered by Congress. Howard University is a historically Black university, which ranks among the highest producers and always have of the nation's Black professionals in many disciplines. Just a few notable graduates, including myself, are Carter G. Woodson, and you can have no discussion of African American history without him. Carter G. Woodson was Dean of Liberal Arts and the second African American to graduate with a doctorate from Harvard University in Boston. There's a statue commemorating Dr. Woodson at 9th and Rhode Island Avenues in DC. He is the father of Black history. That's because he devoted his life to the African American story, making sure it was told properly, making sure that books and publications were published that were accurate, working with scholars from all over the world to make sure the true story of the African American experience was told. And his house is maintained by the Park Service, and we'd love to take you to visit it. Some of the notable graduates of Howard University include Thurgood Marshall, first African American US Supreme Court Justice. Zora Neale Hurston, anthropologist and activist. Debbie Allen, choreographer, director, just multi-talented personality. And actress Taraji P. Henson. Another African American who was silent but had a strong voice in the civil rights movement is, of course, Rosa Parks. One day after work, Rosa Parks refused to stand up on a crowded bus just so that a white man could sit down in her seat. This act sparked the Montgomery bus boycott led by a young Reverend Martin Luther King. It lasted for about a year until the Supreme Court finally ruled that segregation on buses was unconstitutional. And just a note, Rosa Parks also received a Presidential Medal of Freedom later in her life. Frederick Douglass, who is one of the fathers, I would call him, of the civil rights movement. He was born a slave. He escaped from slavery. He taught himself to read and write, and by the time of his death, he penned maybe 5 autobiographies, and he taught others. But even after slavery, he continued to fight for civil rights for everyone, including women and women's right to vote. Frederick Douglass's home, Cedar Hill, is preserved in Anacostia in Southeast Washington, D.C. And you're able to visit there and see things that he actually used. Now, the next stop on our visit is one of my favorites. Near and dear to my heart is the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where I've been a volunteer since they opened in 2016. It's a people's journey and a nation's story. I love that tagline, as it seeks to just inform about all the ways that African Americans contributed to this nation, from the founding of America, from slavery and before slavery, up through today. It covers television, activism, and so many other areas. This is a beautiful digital mural, and you saw one earlier. The museum does this from time to time at night, and it's a beautiful display. And again, as you look at the lives, these are just a few of those included: military, sports, politics, engineering, whatever the topic. It's represented here in the museum, and of course, including entertainment and the great entertainers. The museum recently opened a portal called Talking About Race, because although it's hard as it says, it's necessary. So whether you need to have conversations with children, or you just want to, for yourself, understand more about race relations and discussions, this is a great resource for you, or for anyone. And then I would be remiss to not discuss Black Lives Matter. As you know, this is a movement that started in the US because of injustice and abuse of power, but quite frankly has gone around the world. And as you'll notice in this picture, similar to in 1963 at Dr. King's speech, people from all races, religions, it doesn't matter, color, creed, ages, are included in this fight for justice. In early June of 2020, DC Mayor Muriel Bowser had this 2-block representation of huge letters that took up the entire street that say Black Lives Matter. She had this artwork commissioned, and you can see at the very end of the street, the White House. It leads right there to the top. And as you can see from the street sign, this is Black Lives Matter Plaza. I like to quote Martin Luther King here as well, who said that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it's the presence of justice. And this movement is about justice. And as we come to a close, I would like to introduce you to 9-year-old Caitlin Saunders, who told CNN that she wanted to replace a lot of the negative messages people had in their minds with positive ones. So here is Caitlin with her inspirational message. On behalf of all of us at DC Nation Tours, thank you for joining us today. I'm Lori Williamson. I'd love to take you on an African American heritage tour, but please keep in mind, whatever your interest in DC, we would love to see you and take you on a tour, whatever your interest may be. Next time you're in the city or coming to the city, come smile with us.
Bravo! what a wonderful presentation. I loved it. Please leave us your comments, how you felt about this topic. We love to embrace love in our city, in our nation. Stay safe, be kind one another. And so we will see you soon in Washington, D.C. We use our earpieces. Our tours are open, especially the walking tours. So see you soon.
Bye.